And as KXEL Live and Local continues in this 8 o'clock hour on a Friday morning, well, it's still the first part of July. That means a brand new issue of Iowa History Journal has just hit the newsstand racks. Of course, if you're a subscriber, and if you're not, why aren't you? You got your copy a bit ago. Iowa History Journal comes out 6 times a year. The July-August issue is out. We're joined via Zoom by the owner and publisher of Iowa History Journal, Michael Swanger. Thanks so much for taking the time, sir, as always.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.
Now, often when the magazine comes, it's a surprise to me about what the articles are or what's on the cover. And I have to tell you, I had a feeling of what would be on the cover this time, because the cover story is authored by KXEL's Tim Harwood, and I knew when he went to do field research on the topic, etc. And what a delightful topic that the two of you agreed upon. Tell us about this.
Well, I guess it was no secret then, obviously, since he probably spilled the beans to you, but I appreciate you holding on to the fact that what it was he was working on. I can't say it was a subject matter that was so secretive and undercover, but I can understand why he kept under wraps what he was doing, because he put so much work into what he was doing to write just a wonderful cover story for us about the classic Iowa summertime tale, State Fair.
And this was a book. It was a Broadway production. What, 3 movies? Talk about getting mileage out of Phil Stong's original novel. How did the idea for a cover story on State Fair, how did that come about?
Well, like so many of our good story ideas, they come from writers like yourself and like Tim. And Tim actually pitched the story to me last year, and it was probably around summertime, so it might have been on his brain at the time. Certainly, I was aware of the story. I know Iowans are familiar with it as well. We're not touching on a milestone anniversary per se, but it was just overdue. It was something that, as far as I can remember, we had not touched on before with IHJ, and it was just one of those classic stories. You know, I have a nice problem. We've talked about this before. I have a list of stories longer than my arm. I have more story ideas than I do pages, and it's amazing how many of these big stories still keep popping up in my list of things that I want to get to, and this was just one of them. So I was really glad to get to kind of check this one off the list for the first time, because Tim did a marvelous job of wrapping his arms around this story, and it's something, at some point down the road, if he wanted to dive into it deeper, I'm sure that we could, because he shares just a plethora of information that could almost spawn some additional content.
And the reason I knew about it was he took a road trip one day to Drake University, to the library, to do firsthand research, and some of the images and certainly the information we see in this came from Drake University because, again, Phil Stong, the author of the novel, was from Keosauqua and Van Buren County.
That's right. He's from that area. When he went to college, after he went to college, he worked at the Des Moines Register. And so Drake University has a wonderful archive, as Tim uncovered, about Phil's work over the years, including his work as a reporter, and of course, what he wrote in terms of State Fair and other novels. And Tim's efforts really pay off here, because one of the more interesting things, pieces of artwork that he pulled from the archive, and we published it in the story, is a letter that he wrote home about the success of State Fair. And the letter says that he sold it for $15,000. The rights to publish the book finally, after he'd been looking for a publisher. It's a Western Union telegram. That's a really cool piece of artwork I'd never seen before related to the State Fair. So I was really grateful to Tim for putting in the extra effort on this one. He has some photos of Phil. We have a photo of the original cover of State Fair, which you don't see every day. And then we have lots of artwork too. We have the posters from the 3 films, the 1933 movie, which starred Will Rogers, the 1945 movie that featured the Rogers and Hammerstein score, and then of course the 1962 movie, which was a flop compared to the other two because they moved the storyline to Texas from Iowa. Even though it had Pat Boone and Anne Margaret, it was widely panned. But that's just some of the artwork, and then that's not even covering the details and all the backstory to State Fair and Phil Stong's career that Tim uncovered, going back to his roots in Van Buren County, growing up in that rural setting. Even though he didn't work on a farm per se, he was around it. He was informed by it. It informed his life. It informed his work ethic, and it definitely informed the story State Fair.
And it's interesting because, again, people are very likely familiar with, I would suggest, the musical, number two of the three movies, probably more familiar with that than any other. They may not even remember that it was a book, and they may think, well, how can I possibly find a copy? It's still in print thanks to the University of Iowa Press. That's fascinating to me. This thing is almost 100 years old.
Yeah, I had not thought about that either when we discussed the story. So I was happy to read that when he submitted his final draft that Tim interviewed the University of Iowa Press to talk to them about that because this time of year they find that it's sought after again by readers not only just in Iowa but across the nation because it was such a popular story. And as you say, going back to what you originally touched on, it hits on all forms of popular culture. Obviously, it was a best-selling book right out of the gate. There were three movies. Then it hit Broadway in 1996. There was even a TV special about it. I mean, its legacy is ubiquitous, not only through our state but beyond. And yeah, it's just amazing uh, how widespread its popularity has been over the decades, and then it has that kind of staying power. And as you know, from having read the story, and Tim mentions this at the end, in a couple of years from now, it's going to enter the public domain. And so it'll be available for an assortment of people to publish the book or their version of. But I would encourage people to go out and pick up the version that exists now, the classic, the original that the University of Iowa is pressing, because that's how Phil Stong wrote it, and that's the best way to read it.
And when we started the Radio's Golden Age series with Steve Darnall on Sunday nights about 3 years ago, on the inaugural broadcast, Steve included a radio adaptation of the State Fair film. And he thought that was a good way to connect to Iowa. It certainly was. Had Mickey Rooney and June Lockhart and her family in that as we go back in time. Now, I have to admit, I'm not a fan of movies to the extent of someone with your pedigree. Which of the three, if somebody is going to pick one of the three, which should they pick in your view, either because you've seen it or you think it's truest to the material?
Well, I'm not a movie critic by any stretch of the imagination. I can see why people have panned the one in the 60s. It just isn't very good, and it's not based in Iowa, so that automatically gets dismissed. To me, it's tough to beat an original. I think the movie starring Will Rogers is just it's a great. I don't know. It's just a great movie, and of course, the one in 45, which was arguably the most popular because of the score is excellent as well. But I don't know. I guess I'm a bit of a throwback. That maybe that's why that I featured a few more photos from the movie, the original movie, than I did the others because it's just hard to imagine anyone else other than Will Rogers playing the patriarch of the family. I mean, he really encapsulates that character perfectly. We have a couple of pictures from the movie, and one of the wonderful tidbits in the story that Tim shares is that Will Rogers had become so friendly with Blue Boy, the hog that was being portrayed in the movie, that while they were filming the movie, in between scenes when he had time off, he would go take a cat nap with the hog in the pen. That's how familiar he got with his quote unquote co-star. And I don't know, he just had that kind of rapport, that kind of touch with animals. Anyone who's familiar with Will Rogers' work knows that. So I don't know. I kind of lean towards the original classic version of it.
And I'm going to have to ask Mr. Harwood tomorrow about The original Blue Boy, I did not know that was from a farm in Tama County, my old ancestral home. So I've got to find out what family provided Blue Boy for the 1933 movie. I knew that Phil Stong was related to Duffy Lyon, who for decades was the butter cow lady. She was a Stong. That was her maiden name. But there's just so many angles here, and you get to learn all of them if you pick up a copy of Iowa History Journal, iowahistoryjournal.com. If you're wondering where you can pick it up, there are a lot of places for you to get that second, third, and fourth copy, are there not?
There are. You can visit our website, obviously, but every Barnes and Noble carries this, as do many Hy-Vee stores, Books A Million, and some select Walgreens and Walmart stores as well. So if you can't find it, just come visit us or online or give us a call. Happy to get you a copy.
If you can't find it, you're not looking hard enough. You need to up your level of shopping, is what it comes down to. Michael Swanger is our guest. He is the owner and publisher of Iowa History Journal. The July-August issue is now out with a cover story written by Tim Harwood on the classic State Fair over the course of nearly 100 years. Now, this is the July-August issue, and you've taken the opportunity in a few different places to yourself do some original writing, not only in the publisher's column, but you've also paid tribute to the Revolutionary War Memorial. And I was in Des Moines not long ago, and I don't spend enough time just walking the grounds of the Capitol, but I took a walk because it was easier than driving. There are so many things there that we just don't know about, and here's another example.
We take it for granted, don't we, Jeff? And
Absolutely.
I live in West Des Moines, and I think about how close this is to me, and I wondered before I discovered it why I had not done so sooner. So, yeah, we have obviously been talking about Iowa's surprising connections to the Revolutionary War Memorial. You and I obviously discussed that with the May-June issue. That was our cover story. It's a theme, it's an idea that I am going to try to continue through the rest of the year because it had been on the front of my mind since last summer when I began planning this year's editorial content. I had stumbled on the Revolutionary War Memorial on the grounds of the Iowa State Capitol in Des Moines years ago when I went to photograph the Soldiers and Sailors Monument, which was another story that we talked about. And I just happened to walk over and look at it because I saw these blooming wild roses, Iowa's flower, in this circular setting, and it piqued my curiosity. And I tried to walk and look at every memorial that was on the grounds, but that one really caught my eye, and I spent a lot of time looking at it. So that's when I first became familiar with it. For those who haven't visited it, I would encourage everyone to do so, especially this year. I think if you have any kind of sense of history or any kind of buzz still from the 4th of July, take advantage of that energy and that motivation and visit this monument when you can, because it's so unique. It's the only one in the state of its kind. It pays tribute to 41 known patriots who were buried in Iowa. And most of them are buried on or lived in the eastern and southeastern portion of the state, obviously, because that's the portion that was settled first. So we're talking about men who fought in the war, moved to Iowa afterwards, lived and died here. They're buried here. And this monument was not erected until 2002. And it was from the sons of the American Revolution who came up with the idea to create it. In the middle of the monument is a central piece that has the names of all of the known 41 patriots. Last summer, they added a name to it, and we touched on that in the last issue. But then encircling that center monument are 13 pillars that represent the original 13 colonies, all of which have a saying or a quote that is attributed to their state. And then the aforementioned wild roses adorn the monument. But what's really interesting, Jeff, and I found this out in my research, was there are some maple trees near the monument. And I didn't think anything about it. They look like any other maple tree like we see here in Iowa. And I found out that they were retrieved, they were seedlings or pieces that were retrieved from Mount Vernon. So there's a direct colonial tie to this monument. I just think it's not only is it beautiful, you can stand there, you can overlook the East Village and the downtown skyline, but there's a lot of information there. And I think a big part of our history that's largely ignored. And that's why I encourage everyone, especially this year, with all the enthusiasm with the 250th anniversary of our nation, that you go visit it.
And you really, this time of year, you don't have the legislature that you have to battle with. There aren't buses of school children, as there often are during the school year. And so if you just take the drive, there's free parking nearby, and just walk the grounds. It's a wonderful experience because of all the different things. And even though I've gone there seemingly forever, I come across something a little different each time, like, oh, that's right. This is here. Here is this map of the state of Iowa in stone inlay on your way to the historical building. Well, you don't think about that when you enter the Capitol because it's to the west side. I came upon that the other day. So well worth your time to do that. I also enjoyed the Declaration of Independence reprint that you have in here. You typically devote a page to old photographic evidence of some experience. I had never seen this. Tell us what we find here. It's really fascinating to me.
It's a facsimile of the original document, but this one in particular caught my eye. Thank you for noticing it. It's the Declaration of Independence featured in an ornamental oval frame with medallions of seals of the original 13 colonies, and then there's medallion portraits of John Hancock and George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, and it was dated. It was printed in 1819. So I just thought it was there are many copies of it out there. As you know, you go online, it's easy to find a search for different looking copies of the Declaration of Independence. But this one in particular caught my eye thanks to the Library of Congress, where we find a lot of our hard to find artwork. And I just happened to like that one. I thought, well, if we're ever going to devote a full page to the Declaration of Independence, it has to be with this issue. And, last issue is, we talked about the state has in its possession another rare official copy of the Declaration of Independence as well. And it is on display at the State Museum in downtown Des Moines through August 1st. So, you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. If you come down and visit the monument, you can also go over to the museum and see a rare copy of the Declaration of Independence with your own eyes.
What I find fascinating also about this reprint from 1819, it was authorized by the Secretary of State, one John Quincy Adams, who, in approving it, Washington is there, Jefferson, Hancock. He did not, in a show of modesty, did not include his father, the first vice president, the second president, who was an integral part of the whole thing. John Quincy Adams himself, of course, would become president and a member of Congress afterwards, as I recall the chronology. So just fascinating stuff, and the artwork is just wonderful from 1819.
You have a good eye, my friend. I did not notice that. I'm glad you pointed that out. I did not. I was not aware of that.
Well, I was trying to figure out now, why would you put these people? Well, Washington, okay, Jefferson, Hancock, well, of course, he was president of the Continental Congress. And it just finally occurred to me, well, you don't want to be accused of nepotism, so Adams Sr.
Yes.
And there is the Adams Memorial Foundation that is working hard to have an Adams family memorial placed in Washington because of John Quincy, and the family for other generations. It's a fascinating story in and of itself that has nothing to do with Iowa.
Long overdue, because I don't think either one of them, but certainly the senior one, doesn't get the credit that he deserves. I mean, after all, he was the one who orchestrated the whole thing. He's the one who put all the minds together and said, by the way, this 33-year-old Thomas Jefferson should be the guy who writes it.
This Jefferson kid has got a way with words.
Yeah, he has a way with words. Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad to hear that there's something in motion for that, because that is long overdue. He's not on. We don't have a monument to him. He's not printed on any of our money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think he's been largely overlooked and ignored.
Folks may recall I've spoken with Jackie Gingrich Cushman, Speaker Gingrich's daughter. She is in charge of that foundation, and they were very active leading up to America 250. We're speaking with Michael Swanger. He's the owner and publisher of Iowa History Journal. July-August issue is out. State Fair on the cover. IowaHistoryJournal.com is where you can go to subscribe. You can purchase back issues. You can also see a list of many of the retail operations that sell the magazine. And we've talked about the Revolutionary War. My former colleague from the Historical Society board, Mike Vogt, penned a wonderful piece. His work is always so crisp and clean, just as Tim Harwood's is, but on a Vietnam War pilot whose life was changed 60 years ago this year.
Yeah, we're talking about Larry H. Spencer from Earlham, and I'm so glad that Mike wrote this story for us. It's been a while since he contributed a piece to us, and this was definitely worth the wait because, as the headline suggests, Larry was Iowa's longest held prisoner of war. That means of any war. And he was shot down in February 1966 over North Vietnam and was captured and spent almost 7 years to the day, 7 years in the notorious Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner of war. I mean, it's one thing, I think, to be a prisoner of war would be bad enough, but to be held there, I think anyone who's familiar with the history of the Vietnam War knows that that has some extra meaning to it. And so he tells the story of, it's really a story of survival and persistence because he tells the story about obviously what happened, how he was shot down, and what the conditions were like in the camp itself, but also what was going on back at home. And it really finishes on such a heartfelt note in terms of when he did come back. Governor Ray and his wife and his family were there to greet him on the airplane. They held a huge rally with a couple thousand people at Earlham at the high school to welcome him home, and all the people who had been, waiting for him to come home, not just his family, but the whole state was captivated by this story. The nation, for that matter. A lot of people were looking forward to that day when he came home, and it was a big news item. So, yeah, Michael does a great job of telling that important story in our history.
All that and much more in Iowa History Journal, July-August edition, IowaHistoryJournal.com. And you were kind enough to allow me to pen an article, and I won't go into great detail on it, but for folks who are from this part of the world, from where I'm sitting in Northeast Iowa, you remember the great Grant Price. And he had a little squabble with a guy named Nixon once on national television, and it dates back to 1974. I have always enjoyed the story, and I finally got Grant to tell us about it some years ago before his passing, and glad to share that a little more broadly. If you could imagine Richard Nixon as the Watergate net is tightening, to be asked a question about farming and to say in a national news conference, "Farmers never had it so good." Boy, that just had headlines literally written all over it, didn't it?
Absolutely. Not only am I grateful to you for writing the story, I'm so glad that we were able to publish it. You were gracious enough to write it. I can't think of anyone better to write it. And especially, I'm grateful to you for having the foresight all those years ago when you were working alongside Mr. Price to ask him about it. Because otherwise, who has that kind of firsthand information that you have? And I'm so glad that you had the foresight then to talk to him about it. It's a wonderful story. As you mentioned, the president didn't do himself any favors in terms of his reputation at the time. He's staring down Watergate, and then he makes this slip, if you will, on not just to a reporter, but on a televised press conference that was seen around the nation. And obviously, it drew the ire of Iowa farmers in general, but especially here. Because the question was specifically about Iowa farmers, and Grant Price gets one question to ask, and everyone else is talking to Nixon, as you so eloquently write about in the story about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Watergate. Well, Grant had the foresight to ask about what was happening here in Iowa and what was really taking place on the ground. And that was the economic difficulties of our farmers. And that was, the most important thing to be discussing at that time, at that particular conference. And I'm so glad that he had the fortitude to ask the question and that it was captured, and you did a wonderful job writing about it and digging up some great artwork and the screenshot of the video, which is wonderful because, as you know, and I'm probably talking over you, you should be the one talking about this, but you can go to on YouTube and watch the video. It's easy to find, and you can see the exchange. And I love the fact that you point out, who was in that press conference. He was wedged between, Tom Brokaw and Dan Rather. That in and of itself is a story too. You have to tell everyone about that.
Well, as Mr. Price noted, here's Price, his only presidential news conference in his 6-decade career. And they alternated between national and local reporters at this. And the guy who asked a question before Grant Price was named Dan Rather, and the guy who asked a question afterwards was Tom Brokaw. And the news conference is memorable here in Iowa because of the farmer's comment that drew all sorts of attention. But right before Grant Price got up, Dan Rather asked a question, and this is the famous exchange we see in anything that has to do with Rather and Nixon. The protocol is you get up and you state your name and your affiliation. And so he stood up and said, Dan Rather, CBS News. Now, this was a news conference in front of an audience at a broadcasters convention. So it was odd on that front, but he announces himself, Dan Rather, CBS News, and some in the crowd applauded, which led Nixon to then try to cover up and say, are you running for something, Mr. Rather? And Rather, rather than just chuckling or whatever, said, no, Mr. President, are you? And you see the expression on Nixon's face. He knew he had lost the exchange, and whatever question came next, and he probably thought, oh, good, here's a guy from Iowa. I'm going to get a softball, and that was swing and a miss as well. It's a fun story. I enjoyed talking with Grant over time about it, and I appreciate the opportunity to share it with the broader audience. In the current issue of Iowa History Journal, July-August edition, newsstands everywhere, subscription even better at iowahistoryjournal.com. Wow, we are already through 4 issues of a 6-issue year. Appreciate the time as always, Michael Swanger. We'll do it again in early September, if not before.
Looking forward to it. Thanks for all your great work, Jeff.
Well, you're providing such a tremendous service with this magazine. It's just great fun and a great resource. It's Iowa History Journal online, iowahistoryjournal.com. Michael Swanger joined us from his home base in West Des Moines, the offices of IHJ. So you can hear this conversation now on a Friday on News Talk 1540 KXEL, where Iowa comes to talk.